The wind howled across the frozen plains of East Prussia on the night of February 7, 1807. Snow swept across the darkness in violent spirals, stinging the eyes and burying the dead. Somewhere in that endless white void, tens of thousands of French and Russian soldiers dug their boots into the ice, clutching their muskets as the temperature dropped and the sky turned the color of iron. They knew what was coming. They could hear it in the wind, the distant rumble of artillery, the muffled grind of wagons, the low murmur of orders carried through the storm. A battle was approaching unlike anything Europe had ever seen, and before it was over, the snow around them would run red. The town of Eylau lay in the center of this frozen world, a cluster of houses half hidden behind drifts of snow, its church tower looming over the empty square. This small, quiet place was about to become the heart of one of the bloodiest battles of the Napoleonic Wars. And as the armies approached, even the veterans felt a tightness in their chests. There was something wrong here. Something unnatural. War was expected, but not this storm, not this silence, not this sense of dread that crept beneath the armor. Napoleon arrived in Eylau just after dusk, the snow clawing at his cloak, his boots sinking into the frozen slush. His army had been marching for days through blizzards, their fingers numb, their uniforms crusted with ice. The emperor entered the church, now a makeshift command post, lit by a few trembling candles. Maps were spread across the altar. Outside, the wounded lay in rows on the stone floor, groaning in the dark. The storm screamed through the broken windows like a warning. Yet Napoleon remained calm. He believed he had cornered the Russians. He believed tomorrow would bring victory, but he didn't know what Marshal Bennigsen was planning. He didn't know that the Russian army was not retreating, it was gathering. Reinforcements were marching through the night. The storm that froze France's finest soldiers was the same storm concealing an army far larger than Napoleon realized. The night was long. French soldiers huddled behind walls of snow, teeth chattering. Some prayed, others slept, others simply stared into the darkness, waiting for dawn. When the first pale light crept across the horizon, what they saw made their breath catch. The Russians were everywhere. Their lines stretched across the plains, dark shapes against the white emptiness, thousands upon thousands of them. Cannon glinted in the early light, drums rumbled. Flags snapped in the wind. Napoleon stepped outside the church and stared across the snow. For the first time in years, he felt uncertainty, a flicker of something he had not felt since Egypt. The Russians were not merely holding a defensive line. They were forming for a full attack. The opening shots came with the fury of a thunderclap. Russian artillery unleashed a devastating barrage. Cannonballs tore through the snow, ripping apart the frozen ground, shattering limbs, smashing bones. The French lines staggered under the impact, men falling like broken dolls. Then came the infantry, advancing in thick columns through the storm. Bayonets lowered, shouting their battle cries into the wind. The French counterattacked, fighting blindly in the swirling snow. Muskets jammed with ice. Powder grew damp. Soldiers fired at shapes they could barely see. Sometimes they hit the enemy. Sometimes they hit nothing. Sometimes they hit their own men. The battlefield dissolved into confusion and white chaos. No one could see more than a few steps ahead. Every shadow looked like death. Napoleon moved among the front lines, his presence turning panic into resolve. "Stand firm," he shouted. "Hold your ground." But even he could not see the full picture. The blizzard hid everything: the strength of the Russians, the collapse of the French wings, the danger closing in on him from both sides. The center of Eylau became an inferno. French grenadiers fought hand-to-hand with Russian infantry in the streets, smashing through doors, firing from windows, clashing in alleyways where snow mixed with blood. The church Napoleon had stood in hours before now echoed with musket fire and the screams of the dying. Bodies piled at the doors. The town itself seemed to tremble beneath the violence. By mid-morning, the French line was barely holding. Marshal Augereau's corps, blinded by the storm, drifted off course and marched straight into the Russian guns. What followed was a massacre. Whole regiments were torn apart before they could even fire a shot. Augereau himself collapsed, wounded, dragged away by his aides, as his corps dissolved around him. Then came the moment Napoleon feared most, a Russian breakthrough. Their infantry surged toward Eylau, aiming straight for the emperor. If they captured him, the war would end then and there. The fate of France hung in the balance. Napoleon's guard rushed forward, forming a human wall around him. Their bearskin hats coated with snow, they unleashed deadly volleys, buying precious seconds. But the Russians kept coming. The French army was on the edge of collapse. One more push and Napoleon would be forced to retreat, or worse. The emperor knew what had to be done. There was one final weapon left. A weapon of sheer, terrifying force. He rode back through the storm and summoned Marshal Murat. Murat, the cavalry commander whose brilliance was matched only by his reckless courage. His uniform was soaked, his hair frozen with snow, but his eyes burned with fire. Napoleon pointed to the Russian lines and gave the order that would decide the battle. Murat nodded once, then he spurred his horse. Moments later, the ground began to shake. It was a low tremor at first, then a thunderous roar. Through the blizzard came the impossible sight of more than 10,000 cavalrymen forming into massive columns, cuirassiers in gleaming breastplates, dragoons with drawn sabers, hussars, chasseurs. Every mounted regiment Napoleon had, a tidal wave of horseflesh and steel. The greatest cavalry charge of the Napoleonic Wars was about to begin. The French infantry stepped aside, forming corridors in the snow, watching in awe as the cavalry thundered past. The noise shook the earth. The Russians saw the movement too late. They tried to regroup, but the frozen ground slowed them. Their cannons turned, their muskets fired. But the cavalry kept coming. Murat raised his sword. The storm swallowed his shout, and then the entire French cavalry crashed into the Russian army like a hammer falling from the heavens. Snow continued to fall over the frozen fields of Eylau as dawn bled into a gray, colorless morning. The battlefield had become a graveyard of shattered men and dying horses, a wasteland carved by cannon fire and soaked in blood that froze almost instantly on the ground. Yet neither army had broken, neither army had yielded, and now, as the storm tightened its grip, the deadliest phase of the battle was about to begin. The Russians, under Bennigsen, held their grim line along the heights. Their cannons dug into the snow, muzzles black against the white landscape. Their infantry waited in silence, their coats crusted with ice, their faces numb from the cold. They had endured Devote's punishing flank attack, survived the shock of Murat's devastating cavalry charge, and still they held the ridge. But their ranks were thinning. Ammunition was running low. The wounded screamed beneath their feet. Even the most hardened veterans could sense it. One more blow would decide everything. Napoleon knew it too. His army had taken enormous losses, far worse than at Austerlitz or Jena. He had seen the horror himself, men frozen where they stood, bodies torn apart by round shot, entire battalions swallowed by the blizzard. His boots were stained red with blood that would not wash off in the snow. This was no longer a battle of maneuver or brilliance. This was a fight for survival. He looked across the field and whispered, "One more attack." He summoned Soult. He summoned Devout. He sent word for his last reserves, the Imperial Guard. The Russians saw the movement and responded with a fury born of desperation. Their cannons reopened, hurling fire into the white void. French gunners answered with equal rage, their batteries flashing in the snow like distant lightning. The frozen earth shook with every impact, the air thick with powder and ice. The storm roared overhead, but the guns roared louder. Then the ground trembled again. But this time, not from artillery. It was Augereau's corps, or what remained of it, staggering back into the fight, half-blind, frostbitten, disoriented from the blizzard. They advanced into a storm of Russian musketry. They fell by the hundreds. Regiments dissolved in minutes, but still they pushed forward, their boots crunching over the dead. It was madness, but it was enough to draw Russian fire away from Devout's hammer blow on the right. Devout was now fully committed. His divisions pressed hard into the Russian flank, forcing them back step by step. Muskets cracked. Bayonets clashed. The fighting was so close that men grappled in the snow like wolves, rolling over the frozen ground as they struggled to kill each other. Devout's veterans fought with a grim determination, knowing that if they could turn the Russian line, the battle might still be won. For a moment, a brief, flickering moment, the Russians wavered. Napoleon saw it. He watched from a low ridge, his coat flapping in the storm, his face set in stone. This was the opening he needed. He turned to his aides and gave the order that would send fear through every French heart and Russian soul. The order to commit the Imperial Guard. The Guard, the last reserve of the Empire, marched forward through the snow. These were Napoleon's chosen men, giants in bearskin caps, veterans who had never known defeat. Their presence alone steadied the French line. Their advance was slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The Russians fired into them. Cannonballs plowed through their ranks, leaving bloody trails in the snow. But the Guard did not break. They closed their ranks and continued forward, muskets leveled, faces hard as ice. The two lines met in a thunderous volley that tore through both armies. Smoke swallowed the field. Men screamed. Officers fell. 4 minutes. It was impossible to see who had the advantage. Only the flashes of muskets, the sounds of steel on steel, the muffled thump of bodies hitting the ground. Then another sound emerged through the chaos. A long, rising shout. It was the Russians. Their reserves were arriving. Bennigsen, bloodied but unbroken, had called up reinforcements just in time. Fresh battalions surged forward to meet the Godhead. They crashed into the French with savage force, driving them back step by step. Bennigsen's men fought like demons, their rage fueled by the memory of Murat's charge and the sight of their frozen comrades lying in heaps across the field. The Imperial Guard resisted, but for the first time in years, they were outmatched. Their lines bent, their advance stalled. The Russians pressed harder. Napoleon watched, his jaw tightening. This was unthinkable. The Guard, his invincible corps, forced into retreat. The Emperor's aides glanced nervously at him, but he said nothing. His gloved hands clenched the hilt of his sword until his knuckles went white. By late afternoon, the blizzard began to ease. Smoke drifted across the battlefield like ghosts. The fighting slowed not from lack of will, but from exhaustion so deep that men could barely lift their weapons. Both sides stood knee-deep in snow-stained black with blood. Thousands lay frozen where they fell. The wounded moaned in the cold, begging for water, warmth, anything, and still, neither army had broken. Bennigsen looked across the field and saw the strength draining from his ranks. He had no more reserves to give. His artillery was nearly silent. Ammunition was almost gone. If Napoleon launched another attack, the Russians might not withstand it. But Napoleon saw something else, that his own army was on the edge of collapse. Devout's right flank was exhausted. Soult's soldiers could barely hold their muskets. The Guard had taken losses not seen since the days of Italy. Murat's cavalry was scattered and spent. If he attacked again and failed, the entire Grande Armée might be destroyed here, in the snow of East Prussia. And so, after 10 hours of slaughter, the guns fell silent. Neither side claimed victory. Neither side had the strength for another blow. The Battle of Eylau had ended in a bloody stalemate, but one that scarred Napoleon's legend forever. That night, as the storm settled into an eerie calm, Napoleon walked across the field. His boots crunched over bodies, half hidden beneath the snow. His army had never suffered losses like this. Nearly 25,000 French dead or wounded, a horror unlike anything Europe had seen. For the first time, his men whispered a word they had never dared speak before. Invincible. No, not anymore. And far to the north, in the dark forests of Russia, Tsar Alexander heard the news and smiled grimly. Napoleon had been stopped, not defeated, not destroyed, but stopped all the same. Eylau had shown Europe that the Emperor could bleed, that his armies could be broken. that his conquests were not inevitable. It was only the beginning. Ahead lay Friedland, Ospernessling Wagram Borodino, a road paved with fire that would end in the snows of Moscow and the ashes of an empire. But for now, on the frozen field of Eylau, the silence of the dead spoke louder than any victory. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility had cracked, and once a myth cracks, it never fully heals.